We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Liberty comes and liberty goes, sometimes in big wars, but more often by the death by 1,000 cuts. We're talking liberty today on just a few of those thin slices with constitutional attorney, host of the Uprising podcast, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, and the founder of all things of brilliance and bourbon, Mr. Scott DeCosenza, Esquire. Welcome back to the show, Scott.
Well, with an intro like that, we can't go wrong, Mark. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
That's why I keep doing them. We keep bringing you back.
Yeah.
So this first slice of life that I want to talk about, Scott, it's about how the mayor of Philadelphia has decided to, well, as far as I can tell, circumvent the Second Amendment. What are the details? And more importantly, how unconstitutional is it?
Sadly, in the city of my
brotherly
birth,
love.
and of brotherly love, and of the cradle of liberty, as I like to call it, Mark, they have had a generation-long campaign against the Second Amendment. Not advertised as such, as you might imagine, but just practically speaking,
It wouldn't fit on the bumper sticker.
And I say that as somebody who is very familiar with the city's attempts to frustrate the Second Amendment, as a former resident of that state and gun enthusiast. So.
And a member of the bar in said state
Yeah,
as well.
that's true, yes. This particular affront is it's one of these things that really, I think the legal analysis pales in comparison to the political analysis. And that's because what they've done, Mark, is said that they're banning guns in public parks in the city, and they're going to put signage up to that effect. This is in the wake of the tragic murder of a young woman who worked at a park rec center who was killed by basically crossfire from neighborhood criminals. And one of them was 14 years old. So not persons who were carrying, as you might imagine, with this law will affect legal gun owners who you might want in those parks, by the way, because what we do know is that when lawful gun owners carry, we see a safety benefit and a crime reduction. That's what the data shows us.
Yeah, 2.5 million defensive uses per year, according to the CDC, I believe.
Yeah, so what this is going to do is just keep the law-abiding people out of the park. We presume that the 14-year-old who was involved in the shooting that led to the death of the park worker, whose name escapes me sadly, we don't suspect that he would look at the signage and think, I'm 14, I'm already carrying a gun when I'm not allowed to have a gun at all, much less carry one, and maybe I'll just turn back because of this signage. I think that just me announcing that demonstrates how preposterous it is, right? So all it's going to do, once again, is keep law-abiding people out of parks. And you mentioned in the lead-up, is it unconstitutional? Well, likely it is, given the Bruin case that the Supreme Court handed down in 2022. I see that you want to...
I do have a question there, Scott. Am I right in thinking that Philadelphia, specifically doing this, they're going beyond what is presently legal within the state of Pennsylvania? And is that therefore...
Yeah. Let me cut in and I know where you're headed with that. Yeah. And so what many states have had and do have is something called preemption with respect to firearms laws, which is that because of the meddling nature of every little hamlet and burg in a state wanting to weigh in on national issues like whether it's guns or abortions, and they say you may not legislate in this area because we're going to do it at the state level. But what gun opponents, gun grabbers like to do, Mark, to a great effect, is remove those preemption regulations or laws so that everyone can frustrate the will of people to carry firearms. And as you might imagine, it becomes untenable to do so. If you don't know, if you're walking from, from your town to 2 towns away, what all the regulations might be in the midst. So it's a great way to kind of frustrate the expression of the right to keep and bear arms. In Virginia, where I now live, there's a preemption. There was preemption, and then the Democrats took over, and they removed preemption for the purpose of frustrating firearms carry. But all of those preemption things, I predict, Mark, will fall once the challenge to them gets to the Supreme Court, because the Bruin decision, I think, makes those laws unconstitutional.
Okay, so am I right in thinking, you mentioned earlier that it's the politics of it that's possibly more interesting, because this kind of thing, making certain areas of a city or a town gun-free zones, I mean, we've seen that quite recently in New York. This is something we're seeing quite a lot of.
Mark, I speak weekly to, I would say, at least 3 different Philadelphians, none of whom are Republicans or are gun enthusiasts or gun carriers, family members and close friends of mine who are, to a person, terrified of the security situation in Philadelphia. And I think this is only about trying to throw a sop to them, especially the ones who won't examine the likely effect of the law with a lot of critical thinking, in just a bid to say, hey, we're doing something here to try to make you safer in a city that is anything but.
Well, it seems that they're aiming to be seen to be doing something rather than actually doing something, because as you point out, a 14-year-old and a young lady getting caught in the crossfire, that's likely, almost certainly, in fact, definitely, I feel like I'm on the Muppet Show, one of the hecklers in the balcony, an illegal firearm or illegally possessed firearm. And this law does...
You can be Stadler and I'll be Waldorf.
That's right. I couldn't remember their names. But that gun was almost certainly legal anyway, and therefore this law will do nothing.
It's not legal for a 14-year-old in the United States of America to carry a pistol anywhere, anytime. I mean, maybe there's a hunting thing if they're actually like with a parent or something. Okay,
and a bear comes.
Yeah.
But so the law will actually do nothing to prevent the crime for which it's been crafted. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh,
the law will do nothing for
the
crime for which it's crafted.
Yes.
Okay, so it's virtue signaling.
Yes.
Oh, well, there we go. Why didn't you just say so at the beginning, Scott? New laws, liberties, death by 1,000 cut. It's virtue signaling. It can be safely...
We could have trimmed it down to 102, you know what I mean?
Cut it down to 305, as Billy Joel once sang.
Absolutely.
Now, also on our Liberty radar, Scott, it's a challenge to Joe Biden's signature student loan debt forgiveness scheme. Now, we don't have much time left on this segment, but I'd like to know, is this a serious challenge to the student debt forgiveness scheme? Well,
serious, and the problem is that there's going to be a standing issue that they're not likely to get passed. And when you say, is it serious, how I process that is it likely to proceed?
That's my intent behind the question. Yeah.
And I think the answer is no.
Okay. Why? Because of standing.
Yes, because you can't just file suit against something that the government did because you don't like it. That's not how it works. You have to have a particularized damage that the government has granted you permission to sue it. It's a sovereign. So the government's a sovereign, and it allows the citizenry to sue it under certain circumstances only, and those have been issued forth via statute. So there's a statute. There's a Federal Tort Claims Act, for instance. There are other acts that basically detail out when you can sue the government and for what reasons.
So the American taxpayer being on the hook for an estimated $400 billion is not reason enough to sue, or not a valid enough reason to sue in the eyes of the government.
Well, in the eyes of the people through their representatives, Mark, who have passed the law. So you have to put it out that way. Okay, well, that's an interesting thing. So is the administration likely to face suits that do have standing? And I guess my final question here attached to that is, will they just go ahead and do it anyway and then hope that the remedy that a court could offer becomes moot? I think the answer to that question is yes. We don't know for sure, but almost certainly that's how the government generally proceeds in all endeavors and administrations. They could just go ahead and proceed, and unless and until a court tells them to stop doing so, once the course of action has been charted, unless the court says, do not do this thing, you're ordered to. And even then, sometimes, as you know, as a man who reads the newspaper and produces it, oftentimes it doesn't go that way. So that's what I expect to have happen here.
The federal government with their Jinsu knives taking one slice of liberty at a time. Scott D. Cosenza, thank you ever so much.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you.
And that's almost all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I want to thank our guests, Tim Donner and Lisa K. Donner, and Scott D. Cosenza for taking the time to join us. And my thanks to you, the listeners, from coast to coast for tuning in. My final thoughts for this week. I'll leave you with a simple quote from the immortal Otto von Bismarck, who said, quote, "People never lie so much as after a hunt, during a war, or before an election," end quote. And there's really something to think about there, folks. Keep your eyes and your mind open. You never know who's trying to pull a fast one. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe space.
You only did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.